Why is it that, even though the population has more men than women, in the marriage markets of big cities we still see far more women looking for partners than men? And why, even after more than 10 years of public backlash against sky-high bride prices, have they still not disappeared? Today, I'm going to explain these two issues from a perspective that has rarely, if ever, been discussed. Everyone knows that one of the most surreal social phenomena in today's China is this. In the matchmaking corners of major cities, the number of women looking for a partner is far greater than the number of men. Yet at the same time, in towns and rural areas, the number of single men is overwhelmingly higher than the number of single women. Why does this seemingly contradictory situation happen? Some will say it's because women have standards that are too high, because they were brainwashed by capitalism. Others will say it's because men have awakened and no longer want relationships. But none of that is actually the core of the issue. Before answering directly, we need to look at one key piece of information: the gender ratio in higher education. According to data released by the National Bureau of Statistics, after the 2020s, the number of women in universities fully surpassed the number of men. Whether in technical programs, undergraduate degrees, or graduate programs, women now clearly outnumber men. And you can feel this in real life. Take a walk through almost any university campus. You immediately notice that there are many more women than men, and not just a bit more, but visibly more. This is especially obvious in second and third-tier universities. Without exaggeration, aside from a few engineering-focused 985 universities and some traditionally male-dominated majors, the pattern is the same almost everywhere: more women than men. The number of women receiving higher education has become an undeniable fact. Even economists have started studying this. For example, Professor Yang Lanpin from the School of Economics at Wuhan University of Technology wrote an article called "Where Have the Boys Gone? Reflections on Gender Ratios in Higher Education." The central point of the article is that in elementary school, the ratio between boys and girls is still normal, almost identical to the natural birth ratio. The shift begins with two turning points: the high school entrance exam and the Gaokao, the national college entrance exam. After the first selection, the high school exam, about 55.4% of girls enter high school, but only 46.7% of boys make it in. And the Gaokao selection is even more unbalanced. Around 70% of successful university admissions are women, while less than half of the men manage to reach higher education. Because of these two filters, even though the overall population has more men, fewer men reach university. Now I know what some women might be thinking. See? I told you women are smarter. But that's not it. Men and women have similar IQs. This has been repeatedly confirmed by scientific research. The real reason is simple: girls mature earlier. Physically and mentally, they are 3 to 5 years ahead of boys of the same age. In practice, just look around. In elementary and middle school, many boys are still playing, shouting, and goofing around, while many girls appear far more mature and stable. They can sit in the classroom all day, only getting up to go to the bathroom. Because of this, even though the top 1 or 2 spots in the class may not always be girls, the top 30 is usually dominated by them. Girls' grades are more consistent and, overall, better. That's a hard fact to deny. Boys only start to show their advantages once they reach adulthood. And by then, the Gaokao is long over. That's why, among adults, the number of male researchers isn't lower than the number of female researchers. But in the early stages of education, boys simply fall behind. Moreover, studies show that girls put more effort into their studies due to social pressures as well. Job market pressure, a culture that still favors sons, and the reality that many girls cannot inherit family property. All of this makes many of them feel they have no choice but to study hard if they want to change their fate. Boys, in general, feel much less pressured in this regard. Because of all this, universities today have more women than men, and as women's educational levels rise, their standards in dating naturally rise too. Combined with the traditional female preference for partners who are a level above, university-educated women end up with very few options. The men in their own programs are already few, and even so, many are claimed by other women long before graduation. This explains why, in major cities, there are far more women than men attending matchmaking events. Most of these women are highly educated, and the number of men who meet their expectations is naturally small. And the few who do often found partners back in college. Now let's move to the second question. Why are there so many single men in rural areas, and why do sky-high bride prices continue? Because, as mentioned earlier, the number of men without higher education is much greater than the number of women. And for these men, finding a partner is incredibly difficult. A woman with only elementary or middle school education can still end up dating a man with a university degree. But a man with only elementary or middle school education trying to date a university-educated woman? Almost impossible. This is the result of multiple social forces, all very real and very harsh. So in this situation, how can a man attract a partner? In the end, there's only one path: using material conditions to compensate for disadvantages in other areas. In other words, these men try to attract women by offering extremely high bride prices. When it comes to bride prices, a lot of people misunderstand the whole thing. Do you really think that 500,000 or 800,000 yuan are amounts women just randomly decide to ask for? Of course not. They only ask because there are men willing to pay. The reason why these absurd bride prices continue to exist is simple. There is a large group of single men competing to see who can pay the most to win over a woman. They are the ones inflating the market. And that's why bride prices never disappear. Even if you don't pay, even if I don't pay, there will always be someone who pays in secret. That's precisely why these exorbitant bride prices continue to dominate. With that in mind, let's look at the case of Jiangxi and its extremely high bride prices. The reason is simple. According to the 2020 census, the gender ratio in Jiangxi reaches 122.7. In other words, for every 100 baby girls born, 122.7 boys are born. It's the largest imbalance in the entire country. Jiangxi already had few girls being born. Combined with the fact that women have an even higher chance of attending university compared to men, the result is inevitable. Competition in the marriage market becomes extremely intense. Without paying an extremely high bride price, many men can't stand out at all. See? Everything has a cause. In this world, nothing happens for no reason. And while investigating the gender imbalance in universities, I discovered an even more surreal thing. The gender ratio in kindergartens and preschools. In universities, we see more women than men. But in kindergartens, the opposite is true: it's all boys. People online have shared experiences. One parent said that when taking their child to kindergarten, they found a class with 14 boys and only 4 girls. Another parent said that when picking up their child from full-day preschool, they saw a whole table of boys eating, not a single girl. They were shocked, but this isn't as mysterious as it seems. We're in 2024. The children in kindergarten today are between 3 and 6 years old, meaning they were born between 2018 and 2021. And what happened around that period? The answer is simple. In 2016, China lifted the restriction on having a second child. In 2021, it lifted the restriction on having a third child. So many of the children now in kindergartens come from families that had multiple children. And knowing Chinese social reality, who is more motivated to have a second or third child? The answer is obvious: families whose first child is a girl. Before, under the one-child policy, they were forced to stop after their first daughter. Now, with the rules relaxed, many parents are trying to fulfill their old wish: having a boy. Never underestimate the cultural obsession in China with having a son. I know someone who is the 6th daughter in her family. I once asked her why her parents had so many daughters. She replied, "Because my parents always wanted a boy. They kept trying, and up to the 6th pregnancy, they only had girls. Just when they had lost all hope, the 7th pregnancy finally resulted in a boy. On the day her brother was born, the parents celebrated with a feast for the entire village." See? That's how far Chinese families will go to secure a son. That's why there are so many boys in kindergartens today, because many were born to fill an emotional gap for their parents. These boys didn't appear by chance. They exist because they represent a way for parents to resolve a deep, long-standing frustration. I also saw people venting online, saying they're almost 30 years old, only children, and suddenly their parents had a newborn baby boy. They don't even know how to handle this new family dynamic. But actually, the increase in family members is the least concerning issue. The real issue, the one we should be paying attention to, is the future marriage environment in China. Because the logic is simple. If today's kindergartens are full of boys, then 20-something years from now, when this generation reaches adulthood, what kind of marriage market will they face? Stay tuned. In the next episode, I'll continue revealing more truths behind the world we live in.
In the end, when we put all these pieces together, the absurd imbalance between boys and girls in kindergartens, the wave of men without higher education competing in the rural marriage market, the female university students with increasingly higher standards, and an educational system that filters out boys before they even understand what's happening, everything suddenly starts to make sense. What looks chaotic is actually driven by an almost mathematical logic, and it's precisely that logic that makes the whole situation comically tragic. We grow up hearing that your destiny is in your own hands, but when you look at China today, it becomes clear that the fate of many people was decided long before in the result of an exam they took at age 12 or 15, in the cultural obsession with having a son, in birth policies that changed too late, or in the simple statistic that there are now more women than men in universities. It feels as if everyone is stuck on a game board that was set up decades ago, and now they're just trying to play with the pieces that are left. And that's where the irony shows up. On one side, desperate men offering sky-high bride prices to stand out in a market with too few spots for too many competitors. On the other side, independent university-educated women demanding the minimum that any ambitious, self-aware person would want, someone at their level or above. And in the middle of this crossfire, a crowd trying to understand why things don't go back to normal. The answer is simple: normal changed a long time ago. Society just didn't get the memo. And maybe the most curious part of all is this generation of boys currently in kindergarten, children of families who insisted on fixing nature's mistake and finally got the long-awaited son. An entire generation born to soothe an emotional frustration and who, 20 years from now, will enter one of the most competitive, unbalanced and chaotic marriage markets in modern history. A touch of comedy, a touch of tragedy, and, above all, a reminder that China's demographic future still has many fascinating chapters ahead. And us? All we can do is watch, analyze, and try to understand how such a vast and complex country will deal with a ticking time bomb built quietly, piece by piece, generation after generation. Because one thing is certain, the bill always arrives. And when this kindergarten generation becomes adults, today's imbalance will turn into a storm, and no one will be able to say they didn't see it coming. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, for more content like this, and of course, see you in the next video.